Először is tisztelt bizottsági elnök asszony, a leghatározottabban utasítom vissza, amit mondott. Minden analógia és összehasonlítás, ami magyar 56-os szabadságharcosokat...
Von der Leyen i Timmermansa i innych urzędników, których tak naprawdę nigdy na oczy nie widzieliśmy.
Friends, I want to tell you about a fresh and very interesting episode that recently played out in the European Parliament. Conservatives from Poland and Germany again took up Ursula von der Leyen, who headed the European Commission for the second time. This happened against the background of corruption scandals and, to put it mildly, not the most impressive results of her previous 5-year plan. And in the end, Viktor Orban lowered the Queen of Europe from her fictional throne. It was very beautiful and spectacular, friends. Let's not delay, let's start. According to one of the MEPs, von der Leyen has become a symbol of the decline of Europe. And the ongoing conflict with Russia has only worsened the situation, finally turning the European Union into a political dwarf, whose opinion seems to be of no interest to anyone. Even Georgia, imagine, has suspended negotiations on joining the EU until 2028. So get ready to hear the devastating speeches of European politicians, and I, in turn, will add a couple of my thoughts. The European Union was once a powerful center of economic and political power, and today he is going through a serious crisis of identity and stability. Many Europeans attribute this decline to the activities of Ursula von der Leyen. Let's briefly summarize the results of her reign, friends. During her time as head of the European Commission, the Union has faced a number of problems, from the energy crisis to reputational scandals. One of the most controversial topics of her board is the so-called green agenda. Her ambitious environmental projects turned out to be simply poorly thought out. Instead of a smooth transition to renewable energy, Europe has found itself in a real energy impasse. The closure of coal mines, the abandonment of nuclear energy, for example, in Germany, and strict environmental standards have led to a huge increase in electricity prices. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban even said that Europe, under the leadership of Brussels, was committing suicide and suggested an urgent return to reliable energy sources. In the meantime, the European Union is losing its attractiveness for industry. In 2023 alone, more than 500 large companies moved their production facilities to the United States and China, where conditions are more favorable. The migration policy of Brussels raises no less questions. Instead of offering a systematic approach to the problem, Ursula and her team decided to redistribute migrants between EU member states. This decision caused a storm of indignation. Poland and Hungary, for example, openly refused to accept this scheme. Polish Interior Minister Mariusz Kaminski said that the European Union should help protect borders, and not create the illusion that each country is obliged to accept migrants at the expense of its security. Meanwhile, the number of illegal migrants in the EU continues to grow. More than 1 million people have arrived in Europe in just 2 years. It seems that while Ursula von der Leyen is reforming the European Union, the Union itself increasingly resembles a sinking ship. Is this the new Angela Merkel in office? Just kidding, friends, we continue. Many migrants who arrived in Europe found themselves out of work, which only increased the burden on the social system of EU countries, such as Germany and France. According to research, more than 30% of social benefits in these countries are provided by migrants. At the same time, cases of street crime and the growth of radical sentiments have become more frequent. The leader of the National Unification Party, Marine Le Pen, called the EU's migration policy humanitarian chaos, noting, "Our cities are changing beyond recognition, and the security of citizens is becoming increasingly fragile." In response, the Brussels leadership seems to prefer to turn a blind eye to what is happening, replacing real work with loud slogans. Against the background of these problems, Europeans are stunned by the new scandal surrounding the purchase of vaccines. According to an investigation by the New York Times, Ursula von der Leyen and her team personally conducted multi-billion-dollar contracts with pharmaceutical giants, and without proper transparency. According to the publication, negotiations were conducted through messengers, and the total amount of transactions exceeded 35 billion euros. The European Ombudsman Emily O'Reilly stated, "This is an unprecedented case when negotiations on such large purchases take place behind closed doors." But despite suspicions of corruption and demands for a review of her powers, von der Leyen was re-elected. Italian Senator Matteo Salvini expressed general bewilderment. In any other situation, such a politician would have resigned long ago, but Brussels has its own rules. Opinion polls confirm the growing discontent of EU citizens. According to the Eurobarometer, more than 60% of Europeans believe that the leadership of the Union is acting inefficiently. In countries such as Germany, France, and Italy, support for Eurosceptics is growing, and in Eastern EU countries such as Poland and Hungary, Brussels is increasingly perceived as a bureaucratic dictate that undermines national sovereignty. Hungarian political scientist Tomas Net summarized, Ursula von der Leyen embodies a Europe that has turned its back on its citizens, protecting the interests of corporations and elites, not ordinary people. And so, friends, the continuation of the dramatic play called The European Union, Twilight of the Empire. Polish and German MEPs fought with Ursula von der Leyen, putting forward their complaints about the state of the EU. One of the deputies, unable to restrain himself, said, quote, Madam Chairman, Mr. Prime Minister, dear sirs, and then everything went according to the well-known scenario. The European Union is deteriorating due to the ideology of climate, failed migration policy, and anti-populist pressure on countries. Here they claim that the green course is ruining the economy, and migration policy only increases social tension. But that's not all. It turns out that agriculture should become a guarantor of food security, and not just a source of carbon dioxide. Finally, the Hungarian presidency proposed a priority task, restoring the competitiveness of the economy, because otherwise Europe seems to be just bending over. Of course, this could not but become a topic for discussion and even, let's face it, for vivid accusations. Alas, the message is clear. Ursula is not a European, but a group of 6 globalists and Chinese lobbyists, whom no one chose. And it's not just my thoughts, friends. And here is another equally harsh speech by Viktor Orban, Prime Minister of Hungary. Restrained and pragmatic, he seems to have become a real scourge for European elites. In his speech, he pointed out that Ursula von der Leyen, with her politics and values, is the cause of the problems. Quote, Ursula has become synonymous with the destruction of the traditional family, the destruction of the economy and sovereignty, and Europe, in his opinion, simply will not survive if it continues to move in this direction. Instead of being a strong and competitive continent, we are turning into a space where green ideology and unfair migration policy rule. Orban even proposed creating a coalition of states to resist this concept of a European superstate and restore the Visegrad Group, making Europe strong, rich, and secure again. In general, Europe where, oddly enough, they still hear the voice of their citizens. And finally, let's not forget about another controversial point. This is something like a court case where everyone is discussing not the future, but how Hungary is out of touch, how its government does not comply with the general canons, and all this while the democratically elected people of Hungary protect their interests. Oh, how wonderful it is to be part of the European Union, where democracy is just a kind of picture on the wall. This is where Viktor Orban started tearing up and throwing friends. Listen, quote, Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen made an outrageous statement, not having the right to review the independent government of sovereign countries. I remind her that the European Union consists of sovereign states, and she is not the Queen of Europe. Moreover, she often talks about democracy and the rule of law, but how to understand these concepts when her friends and colleagues rule. For example, there is now a massive violation of the rule of law in Poland, and this does not bother Brussels, because the country's prime minister is its ally Donald Tusk. Once Europe was the center of the world, it set the tone for world politics and culture. The unification of countries within the framework of the European Union was supposed to strengthen its position, turning disparate states into a powerful force capable of dictating conditions to the rest of the world. However, the reality turned out to be much more prosaic. The EU, instead of being an alliance of great powers, has turned into something more like an orchestra conducted overseas, where musicians obediently follow instructions. One of the most obvious problems of the Union is its military dependence on the United States. Recalling the words of an American analyst, NATO Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who asks the Europeans, "Why don't you want to do your own defense?" His colleagues give a frank answer, "Why? We have you." This phrase vividly reflects the essence of the current EU policy. In order to create your own military and intelligence system, you need efforts, funds, and, most importantly, political will, which, unfortunately, is not there. Against the background of the growing conflict on the borders of Europe, the European Union is not even trying to become an independent player in resolving the crisis. Moreover, any initiatives aimed at contradicting the opinion of the EU are severely criticized, such as Viktor Orban's attempts to establish negotiations with Russia. If Europe is not ready to resolve conflicts on its own borders, can we even talk about its political subjectivity? The economic situation of the EU is no less alarming. The abandonment of energy resources from Russia, which supported a significant part of European industry, became a catalyst for deindustrialization. Factories are closing, jobs are moving to the United States and Asia, and living standards are plummeting. Germany, once the locomotive of the European economy, showed a decline in industrial production in 2023 for the first time in decades. European leaders are desperately looking for ways to restore competitiveness, but in the face of sanctions and confrontation with Russia, it resembles an attempt to repair a sunken ship with paper napkins. As one analyst noted, Europe has given the keys to its economic home to the United States and China with its own hands, becoming just a statistician in a global game where it used to be the main actor. The traditional European cultural identity, formed over the centuries, has undergone major changes due to the massive influx of migrants from Africa and the Middle East, the threat of social tension, deindustrialization, and an increase in crime. All this against the background of the integration of new residents. For example, the crime rate in major European cities such as Berlin, Paris, and Brussels has increased by 30 to 40% over the past 5 years, and a significant part of the crimes are related to migrants. Against this background, the attempts of some EU countries, such as Hungary and Poland, to preserve traditional values and strengthen their borders seem to be a David versus Goliath struggle. While Europe is sliding into political and economic insolvency, Russia is once again entering the world stage as a serious player. The development of BRICS, the strengthening of Russia's position in the energy market and active interaction with developing countries of the global south make Russia an attractive partner for those who are tired of Western dictates. Unlike the European Union, which refused to cooperate with Russia, Moscow is successfully strengthening its position. Moreover, the European Union, finding itself in political and economic isolation, plays into the hands not only of Russia, but also of its overseas allies, who are happy to seize the liberated markets. Today, the European Union is in a state that is hardly enviable. Political instability, economic recession, loss of cultural identity, all this is the result of the policy pursued by Ursula von der Leyen. Once Europe decided the fate of the world, but today it is watching how these destinies are being decided in Washington, Moscow, or Beijing. As one of the British experts said, Europe no longer writes the script of history. It does not even play in the crowd. It is a spectator in the gallery who applauds other people's successes and yawns out of boredom. Will the European Union be able to break out of this vicious circle and become a subject of world politics again? At the moment, the answer is rather negative, but we'll wait and see. Wow, friends, what a showdown in the European Parliament. Ursula von der Leyen is back in the hot chair, and it looks like it's time to change this chair to something fire-resistant. Listening to the criticism of Polish and German deputies, you understand? If she had been involved in the management of the football team, she would have been removed long ago after the first autogol. But politics, as they say, has its own rules of the game. Her green agenda is a separate song. They wanted renewable energy, but they got renewable headaches. Environmental romanticism, apparently, is beautiful only on paper, but in real life it has led to such electricity tariffs that people already dream of good old coal stoves. Well, if someone else thinks that it is possible to close coal mines, abandon the atom, and at the same time warm Europe in winter, then they should be sent on an excursion to frosty Poland. Let them test their theories in practice. And migration policy generally deserves an Oscar in the category, how to make things worse by trying to help. Redistribution of migrants? Poland and Hungary, like that neighbor in the country who does not want to take someone else's cat. We barely feed our own. While Ursula is engaged in the global recycling of the European Union, it seems that Europe itself is slowly recycling its own values. What can I say? It seems that the political dwarf, as he was called, has really reached a growth impasse. And you write your opinion, Friends, I will definitely read it. I also want to thank you for your attention. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and be healthy. See you.